Hi there. So I'm Cy Whitfield. I'm a systems engineer internally at VMware. I come from a small team internally. There's about 5 or 6 of us. And on our team, we are responsible for everything related to Workspace ONE as a product. And we are kind of split up into little sections. I am the Windows service owner. We have a Mac service owner, and we have one for the different platforms. And today I'm going to give a little bit of background about our journey and how we migrated from more of a legacy management into modern management. So just to give you a little bit about myself, I was originally a customer of VMware. I was using legacy software to manage Windows and manage Mac and other platforms. And we actually bought and purchased Workspace ONE and started using it. And I was part of the team that helped implement the entire rollout for our company. And then about 6 short months later, after we got it up and running, I had the privilege to come over to VMware and actually work here now. So in a sense, doing the same thing. It's been great. So I want to give, again, a little bit of history about how we did this journey internally at VMware. And I want to kind of put out a couple quick disclaimers. One is that if there's a topic, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A section if you like to ask a question. And if at the end of this, we'll get to some of those questions. If there's a topic that we don't get all the way into today and you'd like to get more information, just reach back out to our VMware on VMware team and we can set up another session. We can do a session with just us and your company, or we can bring in a couple other people depending on the topic. And we can do, an hour and deep dive into a certain specific topic if you like. So I like to throw that out there. And then 2, again, I'm only going to show you our journey. There will not be any recommendations. This will be a journey of how we got from point A to point B. So with that, I'll kick us off here and get started a little bit. So probably the biggest piece of the puzzle that I always like to get this across to customers when I'm talking is there's really a paradigm shift between the old world and the new world and the way that you think about doing management. In the old world, it was more of as you see on the screen here, a very on-prem setup where you're concerned with the device that is on site, right? You're concerned with if there's a device in a certain part of a building, you would think, well, what restrictions does that device need? What type of permissions does it need? And everything that you're worried about, collections, everything that has to do with that device, it's all based and thought around that device. And really the new world, the paradigm shift there to kind of make the click is now in the modern world, we're more concerned with who is using the device and not so much where it is, whether it's in the building, in the basement, or if it's at home or at a lake house. Anywhere around the world, it should be about who's using that device and who the person is and what permissions do they have and what restrictions do they have and so forth. So really, it's one of the biggest paradigm shifts I like to kind of present. And after you make the click, it's really easy to think that way moving forward. So this was something that we had to not only learn ourselves, but we also had to stress to our teams as we made this journey. Now in the old world, again, everything was, in the building, on-prem. And then as the world evolved, we moved into a SaaS-based type setup and everything now. And I know it's kind of there's a note on the right side of this slide that says typical app connects to 7 cloud services. I think that is a very low number because that's an old stat. As everyone has watches and cars and tablets and everything now, that number is much higher. But in the same stance, everything is still reaching out to talk to the cloud instead of the on-prem. So, and some of this I'm going to, just for your information, I'm going to fly through some of it, and then some of it I'm going to slow down a little bit. And at any point you want to drop a question in, please feel free to do so. Be happy to try to hit those if I can. So our journey was a little different than what a lot of companies looks like now. One thing that we had that is no longer available was we had co-management with SCCM. And what we were able to do was use a piece of SCCM to manage some part of the devices, but we were also able to use Workspace ONE to manage the other parts. And it was a little bit more, it was still a lot of work for us. I don't want to say that, but it was a little bit easier in a sense of we didn't have to just flip the switch and do a cutover one night and then cut on the next morning. We had a little bit of time to work with as we did our journey. Now, I say that with a grain of salt because I know that now that is no longer an option from SCCM to have co-management. So it is a little bit different now. We do have some tools in place that will help with that transition, and you can reach out to, learn more about those as well. We have a tool that was created out of this I'll talk about in a minute called Airlift. It really does help. It takes it looks at all of your entire environment that you currently have with SCCM, or you can look at other environments, and you can see what would transition over to Workspace ONE and how easy it would be. And it kind of gives you like a green light, red light. Anyways, you can reach out for more information on that, and you can run it against your environment without any impact. It's just collecting data to see what you have. So as we looked at this whole process, we knew that it was going to be a big project, but we had to break it down into some key components here. And there's really 4 parts of what we looked at. The cloud obviously is a big piece of that, and how we went from GPOs to CSPs, and we'll dive into that in a minute. Our deployment of devices, we'll spend a little bit more time on this one because this really does become a big factor in the process, because whether you're getting new devices or you're doing refreshes for your colleagues, there's a lot of pieces here that will be impacted. Security, obviously, is a big one. And then, of course, identity. How are you going to make sure that the person that's on that device is that person, and how do they get their correct certs and all that? So we'll dive into each one of these a little bit further in the presentation, but it's just a high-level overview. So again, I talked about the co-management piece that we were able to use to transition over. And as you see here, the traditional, the legacy on the left in the blue. On the right, you have the modern. This is the Workspace ONE in the green. When we first looked at this, we said, what are some of our biggest hurdles? What's some of the biggest payloads that we have to get moved over first before we can even start talking about some of the smaller stuff? And of course, as you see listed there, encryption is a large one. The second one would be all of our apps. And I know this comes up a lot, but a lot of companies do have legacy apps, or they're dependent on legacy programs or processes that companies have set in place. And that really is a big question. One thing that I like to stop here and always talk about on the app catalog that we have at Workspace ONE is it's a really good time to audit. And if you're looking to do the transition, this is the perfect time to, not just apps, but any kind of collections and ARIA GPOs. And a great example of this for us is that when we went to do the transition, we had a lot of policies that were specific to Windows 7. Now, I didn't put that piece in here in the presentation because I feel that most companies are probably past that point, or at least at the end of the Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration. So I left that off of this presentation, but I do want to talk about it because once you make that transition, you're going to be left over with a bunch of policies that were specific to that. And we had a lot. So it was a really good time to audit ourselves and see that we had some apps that were specific to Windows 7, and we had some other collections of policies that we had to get rid of as well. So this whole process, this is a really good time to audit yourself. Of course, the next one on the list is networking. It's a huge one, especially if you're in the office. I know this last year has been a little different, but when we were doing this transition, we had to figure out how do we make sure that networking is fine and we don't have interruptions to our daily business. And then, of course, the last one, one of the most fun topics for Windows is Windows updates. And how do we handle this, and how do we break into getting this transitioned over from the old way of managing updates to the new way for us? I'll dive into a few of these. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them for sake of time, but you'll see a little bit about each one, and I'll hit a couple highlights probably. I'll move forward. So one of the biggest things, of course, was enrollment. How do you get them enrolled? And again, this is a little bit different because for us, it was co-management. We were able to leave them in SCCM, but also manage them with Workspace ONE. So I'm not going to touch a lot here, so it's not really an option anymore. The encryption piece I talked about. There's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving pieces here. As you see, if you can see in the smaller monitor screenshot there, I'm going to show this in a little bit from our actual console, and you'll see a little bit more detail. But essentially, we made these payloads inside of Workspace ONE that you can set all the settings that you need and configure it just the way you need it for your environment and for your company. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And of course, the networking that I talked about. How do you set up your Wi-Fi, or how do you set up, any kind of networking internally? And how do you push it to your devices and that? So Of course, now we're a little bit more remote than we used to be, but you can still push those profiles to the devices so that when the colleagues, if and when they come back to the office, they will already have it installed on the devices and won't have any trouble connecting, which is nice. It's one less thing that your colleagues have to think about. And of course, the big one that I talked about was the Windows updates. You'll notice on the left side in the monitor screenshot there, you'll notice the different waves. This is actually a screenshot from Microsoft, and it was one they had put out a couple of years ago, but it was more of a guideline, like here's some ideas of how you would do it. We do have a version of this as well. We have a small group, and then we basically roll out to a couple of, or actually 3 UAT rings. And then we kind of go into our prod waves, which includes different colleagues. So different ones from, at the time when we built the waves, it was remote colleagues and it was people that are in the office and different departments. We left a couple of departments out on purpose. We left out our finance and we left our VIPs and C-suite. We wanted to leave those towards the end to make sure we didn't interrupt their days. So, how we handled all the updates with Windows, I'm going to jump into in just a little bit, but I can kind of give you an overview real quick of how that looks now. The modern way that we do it is that we basically automatically approve all Windows updates that are not feature updates. So not the OS builds, but everything else, cumulative updates and patch Tuesday and everything. We do it on a 2-day delay, and that's how we get all of our updates out. And since it's using Microsoft or Windows Update Service, not WSUS, but Microsoft Update Service, since it's using that, you can download them from anywhere, anytime, anywhere in the world. You don't have to be on-prem or in the office or anything like that to manage or to get your updates. There's a lot of configurations in the console about how you can do restarts and notifications and stuff. I'll show that in a little bit too. Here's the catalog. Here's a screenshot on the left. And these are very configurable, so it'll look similar to this. But essentially, on the left side, I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of small, but there's some categories on the left side. There's some that's education and EUC and build and finance. One thing that's kind of cool is you can say that you can kind of put together some recommended apps, if you will, for those departments. You can say, oh, well, if you're in finance, you probably need these 5 or 6 apps. And so when a new colleague starts with you, they can click on the finance option on the left there, and it'll display all the apps that they most likely need for their role. So one of the neat little things about the Workspace ONE app catalog, but again, all this is done from the Workspace ONE UEM console, put in here. And again, this was a long transition for us. One of the big questions that usually comes up is, what about our legacy dependent apps, right? Yes, that's definitely a concern. Again, if you're in the mindset or you're in the process of moving to modern, it's a good time to figure out, how would this look different? How would we get off of some of these legacy dependent apps? So moving right along here, again, I'm not gonna hit on everything, but I want to hit on a couple of these. So we all know on the left side that BitLocker can be very complex. There's different versions of TPM. The recovery keys are very painful to enter those in, and BitLocker can have its own requirements. Something that helped us a lot was setting static recovery keys as we did our transition over. On the right side, you see a couple of tips there. I'm just going to leave it here. This recording will be sent out, so you can come back and look at these in detail if you need to. Made some notes on those. And then I'm going to hop over to enrollment and what we found with enrollment, a couple of setbacks. Of course, SCCM over the script issues. And 2 main methods there was device registration and then assigned to logged in user. And there's a whole other conversation around how you want to handle that. Not part of this presentation, but that's another topic that we can dive into another day, and how that we actually do it these days. On the right side, you'll see a couple of tips there. Again, come back to the recording to dive into this. And if there's very specific questions, either put them in the chat or reach back out to us. I just want to show this so you'll have it. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention here was this was not an easy journey for us. Okay, just to be completely honest and transparent, is that this was not easy, and it took time. So this was new to us, right? We had never done this before. And on the left side, what you see is the slide, a piece of the slide I showed earlier, which shows the co-management. The thing to note here is that those first 4 workloads, again, this was new to us, but it took us about 8 months to do those. And I don't know if that's really a proud thing to say because it took quite a while. But what I wanted to point out was that if you move to the right side, it took about another 8 months. So it took us about 16 months to do this entire transition over. Now, because it took us so long and because it was so painful for us, we realized that if every one of our customers had to do what we did, we may not have any customers. So what we decided to do was build a tool. And that's the tool I mentioned earlier, the Airlift tool, which will look at your environment and it will say yes or no, this will transition over, this won't, and make a lot of it easier for you. And so that kind of overnight switch, if you had to make the overnight switch, it would be a lot less painful than what we went through. On the right side, you'll see you can kind of line up between the two. If you look on the far left, you see the blue and you see imaging OSD. And on the right side in the green, you see the first column says provisioning. So that's how these things kind of transitioned over. So imaging is now provisioning, and down the line, you can kind of match it with a few of these GPOs and CSPs on the right side. So on the right side, I want to focus for just a second, and I'm going to tell you which ones we're going to dive into a little bit. Now, again, the provisioning one is a big one for us. Right, that's a big topic because everyone's getting a new device or a refresh every time you hire somebody, and you can't just pause hiring or pause getting new freshes forever. You do have to, manage that at some point. So we'll talk about how we do that and the factory to user piece of it. We'll also talk a little bit more about feature updates or feature upgrades, over the air updates. We can talk about push button reset, Windows Hello for Business, and how we do that. And then, of course, there's a piece down there at the bottom that says Workspace ONE Intelligence. That's a separate product from our Workspace ONE UEM, but we use both of those products to manage our devices. So I'm probably going to show a little bit about intelligence here at the end of this presentation, because it is a piece of the puzzle that we now use to manage our devices. Everything can be done through UEM, but we found that it's using our intelligence tool. It's been faster and easier and prettier, if I can use that word. So I'll hop on down here. So the first one I want to talk about was the device provisioning. I like to point out that around our team internally, the word imaging is kind of a bad word. We don't use that anymore. We've tried everywhere to get rid of it, except for this slide, of course. So imaging is a snapshot in time. Whether you're gold image or just creating a new image on the fly to this month and next month, however you do it at your organization. Provisioning is a little bit different mindset. It's taking a blank install and saying, I'm going to provision it for this person, and I'm going to provision it here at this point in time. And I'll show you how it differs just a little bit here on a couple slides. So the first one I wanted to show was that this always kind of makes me cringe a little bit when I see this slide, because if you look at it, everything that I see here is a breakpoint, right? At any point in this process that you see on the screen, something could go wrong. And so one of our big goals of hardware refreshes and new devices was getting the device, getting the device from the order to the colleague and up and running. And whether your organization has 5 steps or it has 25, everyone has some type of link like this. So there's a few components here that we'll touch on how this works. The first one being the factory provisioning piece. And obviously VMware is a partner with Dell. So you see Dell listed here. I do want to point out that this process is agnostic to Windows devices. So the manufacturer doesn't actually matter. It can be done with various manufacturers. Just want to throw that out there for you in case you're not a Dell shop. The second piece of the pie there is the Azure AD join. Now, this is what VMware does. There are other options out there as well to do this. You can actually do on-prem and still make this happen. And I can show you a couple of those if you're interested later. There's also the third piece, the Windows Hello for Business. This is a great one. There's a couple pieces of it here that we really like. One of them I'll throw out there is that in the process between Azure AD, when you're logging into a brand new device and you're going through the UBI steps, when you get to the screen after you connect to internet and it says, welcome to Microsoft, we wanted to customize that, make it very intentional for our colleagues, especially new colleagues. We get really good feedback on this. We use one piece of Autopilot to manage that screen, and we've customized it. And now when our colleagues get a device straight from the factory, press the power button. A couple steps later, they see, welcome to VMware Inc. Use your work email to sign in. And it's just very customized for them. And again, we've gotten really good feedback from our new colleagues, especially on that. They're fairly impressed with it. So small little thing, but anyways, get to the Windows Hello for Business. After you've set up a few steps there, you'll get to the Windows Hello for Business screen in the UV steps. And just to give you an idea, we've really transitioned to passwordless as much as possible. And we do require PIN. We have biometrics and we have facial, but we do have a PIN requirement for all of our colleagues. And this is how we enforce it here during setup before they even get to the desktop. The last piece of the puzzle is the Workspace ONE UEM management piece. As you get past the Windows Hello for Business and UV steps, the next step is to sign in to Workspace ONE. From here, everything starts kicking off in the background and getting your device ready. So before you even get the desktop, some of the stuff is already running in the background to get you set up and provisioned properly. Now, a couple more slides on the provisioning piece I want to dive into here. One, here's how we kind of did our environment. If you notice, the top line there has factory, IT deployment team, and then it would go to a closet or a desktop, and they would sit there and they would image it, they'd set it up, and then they'd ship it to the colleague, and the colleague would get it. And if they had any trouble with the device at any point, it kind of works their way back up the chain. They go back to shipping and then work their way back to IT deployment if they need help. The factory provisioning on the bottom is where we are now, where we have been for a couple of years now, is you order straight from the factory and that device is provisioned at the factory and shipped to the colleague. When they push the button to power it on to the time that what we call ready to work, which is about 20 minutes. And the way we kind of calculate that is from power button to being able to send an email. It's 20 to 25 minutes, depending on your network connection and all that. But anyways, about 20, 25 minutes, you're up and working. Cool benefits this, a lot of benefits, but one of them is, if you look on the right side, there's no high touch PC setup. There's not a lot of people touching the device to get it all set up. It's easier to respond to users. It's, you don't have to maintain that image all the time. And then of course, no prior login to VPN and no like sharing of passwords and all that kind of stuff. And that's a different piece of the puzzle, but I just want to point it out that that's not how it's done anymore. So we've solved that piece. Okay, hopefully I'm not moving too fast for everyone here. And take a second. I don't see any questions here, so I'm going to keep rolling. But feel free to drop some in the chat if you want. Okay, so I did mention a second ago that this was an agnostic process. If you see Dell here and you're not a Dell shop, just replace it with your vendor's name. But essentially, this is what we do here. So let's divide this into some pieces here. The far left, the green, and the middle, the light blue, are done at the factory. Okay. The dark blue on the far right, this is done after they've hit that step that I showed a second ago, where they hit the Workspace ONE UEM and they sign in. Then UEM starts loading all this stuff. And that's done through UEM and our Intelligent Hub tool. So let's hop over to the green and talk about it for a second. So the reason that we say that we are out of imaging and into provisioning is, here's what happens at the factory, is that we take a very, very basic vanilla install of Windows. We take a Windows 10, and I've got it listed here 2009. We just switched over to actually 20H2 from the factory, and we're about to switch over to 21H1. So I kind of left that here where it is. But essentially, we take that install and we strip it down. Not just like very basic, but we also make sure that Dell doesn't install any programs we don't want them to. We make sure there's no bloatware on it. I mean, it is as basic as you can get for Windows. So you take Windows and you install it. On top of that, at the factory, Dell loads a PPKG file for us that we have built. So in our UEM console, you can build a PPKG, a provisioning packaging file, and you can build an XML file, and you take those two, test them, and then send them over to your vendor, your manufacturer. So we send these to Dell, and Dell applies it on top of that very basic vanilla install of Windows. Now, a couple of the apps that are in there, we originally took the thought about the process of like saying, let's just give everybody everything. And I thought, let's reel that in a little bit. Let's make sure everybody has their birthright apps, and then let's go from there. So in that PPKG, it's just literally a packaging file with apps in it. We of course put our VPN in there, right? It may not have the search yet, but the application is there, so that no matter where you are in the world, when you turn it on, your VPN's already loaded, and you can sign into it from anywhere. There are some internal apps that we've built that we put in there, and some of these are specific to like how we do printing and things like that internally. The third-party apps, so these are your other products like Google's and all the other products out there. So some of those that I want to point out, there is one I wanted to really draw attention to is the Microsoft Office Suite, right? That's a big app, and a lot of companies find that this is a huge benefit here, because what happens is if you have Microsoft Office Suite and it's 3 gigs and you load that at the factory, that's 3 gigs right there. That is not being done over the air. So our total PPKG in the green internally at VMware is about 3.5 gigs. It's even with all of our apps. So they're all installed at the factory. I just want to stress that a lot, that it's all done at the factory, and it's not just an image that we load over time that's 20 gigs. It's 3.5, it's loaded at the factory, and the colleagues not having to do that over the air. The second column in the blue, and I can show you a little bit more here in a minute of what all you can do. What we've done is we've taken inside UEM, we built some configuration files, right? And what we did was we took that and then we added some extra stuff to it. So what you can build in the console is one thing, and I'll show you that in a minute. But you can also take that XML and add to it, and you'll see that we added all the stuff you see here is tweaks that we added to our XML file. So we configured, we added some extra stuff to it, tested it a lot, and that's what we load from our factory on our devices. Some of the small things they seem so small, but we've gotten good feedback. One of the ones I always like to point out is desktop background. It seems like such a small thing, like setting a background is not a big deal. But one thing that we've been able to do is put our colleague support information on that background. And so when someone is day one having issues, that background's already on the device. So if they power on, they get to the desktop and they're having some kind of issues, there's like 5 or 6 different ways for them to reach out and get help. And even if they don't have internet, they have a phone number or some way to reach out. So it's just been kind of cool for our colleagues to say, okay, well, worst case scenario, I can at least reach out for help. And it's a very small thing again, but I like to point that one out. Setting the start menu and taskbar, that's cool too. We kind of strip it down, make it clean so that you don't end up with, again, a lot of bloatware or factory specific manufacturer software. So take all that off. Now, the last column is what happens once you log into UEM during the UV steps and all this stuff starts kicking off. Some of the big things that you'll see there under configurations and tweaks is the Wi-Fi, of course, the config and the search start coming down that you've already built inside of UEM. The VPN. So the VPN software is already installed. Now you're getting the configs and certs. By the time you get to the desktop, you should be okay. Windows updates, we'll go ahead and kick off just to see if there's anything missing. So if you are maybe 3 months behind or something since you did your last PPKG to the factory, or you've been a few months since your last feature update at the factory, you can at least get them here. And so we have that kick off and run immediately. Let's see, a couple more on here. One I always like to draw attention to is the last one, the OneDrive auto config. What we've done internally is we've used OneDrive to automatically back up certain folders. This is really important when people are doing refreshes. So if you do a refresh internally, you get your new device, and I know if you've been in the technology world for a while, you would get a new device and you would set it on your desk and you'd say, yeah, I'm going to get to that this weekend, right? Because you knew how much work it was to move everything over. And so to kind of shift the mindset on that now, and it's been my experience even recently, and everyone internally at our company, is that you can take your new device, sign in, and in 20 minutes you're on your desktop, able to send an email, and then within, depending on your internet, but a few minutes later, 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, you've got all your files already put back in the exact folders you had, and they're already backed up. So what I did was I got a new device, I powered it on, I set it up, and I turned my old one, and I shut down my old one, I set it to the side. And I thought, if I need it, it's right here. And the truth is, it's under my desk now because I never opened it up again. I was able to get up and work in, and I never turned back. So it's a little bit different mindset. Again, if you've been around for a while, you know the pain of having to switch devices, but I love to point that out because it's just a different experience these days. So let me switch forward here. Another piece of that with the PPKG and everything that's on it, we do have this set to be retained. So if you were to, let's say you had a colleague who was having issues and they needed to do a device reset, and let's hope that's not the case. But if it were, even at that point, if you did a reset your PC and you walk through the steps, even if you hit the remove everything option, we have it configured internally that the PPKG is retained in a recovery partition or recovery folder is partitioned separately. And so the device will completely reset. You'll go through the UBI steps again. It will reapply the PPKG that was last put on the device. Excuse me. So whatever you had loaded at the factory, whether it was a month ago or a year ago, those applications will be reinstalled and set up the same way. Now, I like to draw attention to this piece because it's, you could think of it as an, like, oh, you're going back to that image that you had before. One of the differences though there is that, or one of the things to point out is you still have the applications that were installed that I showed on a slide prior to this that you installed at the factory. Those are installed, but even if you had Office, the whole suite installed, even if you were a few months behind, all you would be doing is updating the software. You wouldn't be downloading it all from scratch, 3 gigs. You'd be updating, a handful of updates from there. So it would still be faster of an option. And it's kind of nice because it's, again, for us, it resets the background picture. It does everything for us so that it's a clean experience for our colleagues, even if they do the reset option. So let's see here. I'm going to hop over real quick and go to a different screen. Let me get it pulled up here. I want to show you a little bit about our console. And some of you may be familiar already using our products. Some of you may not be. But I want to show you a little bit about what's in here. So again, I'm going to focus on the Windows section. As you can see, the different platforms in there. This does still exist in case anyone out there needs it. But here's Windows Desktop. We're just going to look at some device profile here. And what I really want to draw attention to in here is just kind of the granular ability to build stuff inside of UEM. So all the policies that you have, a legacy management, and moving those to modern management, what does it look like, right? So I'll hit on a couple of the big ones. So of course there's Wi-Fi. So you can come in here and just kind of, if you've used SCCM for a while, which is a great product, this is just another way of thinking about it and doing it. Is the modern way is to just kind of come in, click a few buttons and set a few, whatever you want to do. These are easy to set up and use. You can set your VPN in here. If you're using, if you're using anything in particular, you want to, I'm not going to dive into all these because there's just so many configurations, but if you're using on-prem system credentials, there are a couple I do want to hit up real quick. Windows Hello for Business that I talked about. I want to show you what this one looks like. So you can allow or not allow certain features. Like if you don't want to allow biometrics, you could, or you can allow it. If you want to require TPM, you could. You can set how many digits and all this stuff. So basically your configurations for that here. Firewall settings, antivirus, encryption, of course, with BitLocker or whatever you choose. All that is in here. One of the biggest ones. So yeah, I guess I can show you this. And if you want to do just the OS drive or all fixed hard drives, I do want to mention that inside of UEM, this question comes up a lot too, is what happens if you have more than one drive, right? That's why you see this option. Something that's fairly recent to our product is that you can also encrypt, secondary and tertiary drives and have those encryption keys inside UEM as well, which is nice. I'm gonna hop over to this one. This is the big one that we usually spend most of the time on when I'm doing these type of calls with customers and conversations, is Windows updates. I mean, it's such a big piece of it. I mentioned earlier that we do automatic approvals for everything that's not OS. So I just want to dive through and show you, not every detail, but I want to show you kind of all the control you can have. And again, we're not personally using WSUS, but you can. And here's what we're doing. And I'm just going to cover a few. You can set the branch you're on. You can set deferrals for quality updates or feature updates separately. So it's not an all or nothing kind of thing. Here's the piece I was talking about, configuring. You can say what your active hours are at your office, your company. You can let the colleague dismiss it. You can require them to restart. You can not allow them to restart. You can do a lot of things. You can say how many times can they dismiss the notification, or I don't want to show them a notification at all. I just want it to install and tell them, hey, we're about to reboot. You can configure this however you want. Down here, you can control a little bit more about the policies themselves. And this is just for the update policies. If you don't want to allow the public ones or block the Microsoft ones, control them yourself, however you want to do it. Down here, there's, I'm just enabling a couple of these things so you can see more options. There's auto approved updates. You can even choose the ones you want to auto update and which ones you don't want to auto update. So again, I'm showing this because it's more of a modern way of managing. It's literally just toggle. So when it comes to, is this a product that's hard to train someone on, or is it hard for a new employee to get up to speed with how to use it? I guess that's subjective, but I personally don't think so because it's a toggle and you can walk through them with it. Excuse me. We do have peer-to-peer. This was obviously big when we were in the office. And you can kind of set a couple of configurations around it as well. You can check some of the memory and network configs around if you want them to be able to use peer-to-peer and how you want to set that in certain hours and all that. So point being, it's very, very granular and there's a lot to configure and a lot you can do with it. So again, there's other stuff in here if you want to configure BIOS and all this. So these are some of the ways that we're using currently to manage with our modern management with our product. And again, you can see some of the stuff in here and how you want to control it. And feel free to go back and pause the webinar later to look at some more of this in detail. I'm going to hop over to another piece that I talked about earlier. I talked about the intelligence piece. Now, inside of Workspace ONE, we are using, I'm showing you the profile section, but of course, back in the background, there's, you can manage the devices themselves. You can manage all your apps from here, custom scripts, anything you want. I mean, it's a very versatile tool, and there's a lot you can do. The reason I want to show you intelligence is, again, we've took this product and we essentially, I built this just to show you a few examples. And so essentially this is a product that's kind of like very detailed reporting at first. And what it's turned into is taking that reporting and then taking action on it. So that's why that's what I mean when I say that we use it to manage some of our estate. And so I'll show you a couple of things on here. Again, I had to, because of the nature of this type of presentation, I couldn't show you a lot of in-depth detail, but I can speak to it. I just can't really show you exactly the ins and outs. But so inside of intelligence, there's a service that's built in called Deem, and Deem is really it's basically device data, right? It's like very granular device data on Windows devices, down to very, very, very specific registry keys or certain things about your device. You want to know your CPU spike or idle time or stuff like that. It's very granular. On here, this is just a widget that we built just to show if Deem was running and not running on a device. Some of these ones that is not running is like, devices that have been recycled or need to be removed or put on hold or anything like that. You can look at your builds. I didn't break this widget out any further than this, but you can make this a different type. You can change it to horizontal. You can see all your different builds and see where you are. You can change it to something else if you like. You just want to see a table. So you get an idea of how easy it is. And you see how fast it is? What I'm showing you right now is actually our live prod data. I took a chance and did a live demo here. But you see how fast this thing responds when I change it back and forth. And it's pulling all this real-time data. So pretty cool stuff. A couple of these on here. So our intelligent hub, of course, is our product, our UEM product it's the client that lives on the device. And you can kind of see what version of it is on the device. And so this is a little bit older widget that we built, but I want to show it to you because if you wanted to watch the rollout of a particular, feature update, you could go to a certain, you can even break this down into like a single version and then see how many devices got it or see what type of devices got it. If all the, as you see down here, here's all the models. Like you want to see which models had it, you can break it down very, very granular. Down here is another cool one of that type of topic is Win 10 OS build per model. If you want to see which models have been updated to the latest and which ones are slacking and that type of thing. Another thing with the Deem data that I like to point out, and again, I'm going to speak to it, but won't show you much, is the analytics behind the crash piece of it. And this is where we take the automation part of it I was talking about. So let's say you have a security software and it keeps crashing because it's on an older version. You could see that the app was crashing. So I have system crash event here. This can also be a application crash. You can build it for anything. But let's say you had an app that kept crashing, or you didn't know that apps were crashing because colleagues weren't reporting it. It's one thing to have someone call in and say, hey, I had a problem with XYZ. And then you have a second person and you kind of perk up a little bit and you have a third one. That's one way to do it. And IT by nature for the last 40, 50 years has always been reactive, right? It's always been, hey, when someone reports a problem, let's see if they're crying wolf, or let's see if there's actually an issue. The great thing about the intelligence tool here is that we're able to see this kind of, well, daily here, but you can still a little bit more real-time type data to see if there's actually a widespread issue, or if it's someone crying wolf, or it's not crying wolf, but maybe it's specific to their device. Maybe it's not globally. But this is really a way to do that. If you had an application, anything that was crashing, whether it's your email client or anything, and it keeps crashing all the time, you could see it crashing. And if you see a big spike in it, you could start taking action on it before you started getting overwhelmed with tickets and calls from your colleagues. What's cool about that is a very much more proactive way of approaching things. So that's what we've tried to do internally, and we've been doing, but we're doing more and more of, is we monitor what's going on in the state and then take action on that. So if we see that Chrome that I'm using right now, let's say it was crashing, we would go back and essentially start working the working the problem and trying to find the root cause and push out a new version or whatever the solution was for it. So I want to show you a little bit more, another piece of it here. This is just a granular breakdown of what you can do. And there's a lot more on here. I'm only showing the tip of the iceberg here, but this is kind of our wave breakdown that I talked about earlier. And you'll see, even on these waves, you can see which versions have, so you can see which versions have already updated or which version they're on. So if you were doing a rollout of a new OS, let's say 21H1, and you're rolling it out and you want to see how well it was doing on this wave, right? You can see how many have been up to the latest so far. And then you roll it out, you go ahead and put it to the next group, push it to the next wave. And you can watch this and see how many started updating, and come back here and refresh and see if it's updated anymore, and check the numbers and watch the rollout go. So this is a very custom way that we've built this. There's a piece that's coming inside this product that will be a lot more automated than what you see in my widget here. So, okay, so with this, I've covered a lot of information. I wanted to give an idea of how we actually do the modern piece of the management. I'm gonna hop back over to here real quick. Okay, and let's hop down here. So a little bit more about the VMware on VMware. These are a couple ways you can reach out to us. There's email and blogs and the website and mobile. You can find us on social media as well. There's a lot there. If you want to have another session with myself, or you want to have a very specific topic, like I mentioned earlier, about updates, or about how do you do application management and version control and all that, let's do it. Let's reach out. Let's set up another time, just us and you, and we'll do a one-on-one kind of call.